This strange jelly is a painting medium called Megilp. It was once the secret weapon of master artists like Turner and Reynolds, giving their work a unique luminous glow. In fact, it might just be the perfect medium, the one all painters dream of, but nobody uses it anymore. So why on earth have we abandoned such a perfect medium? In this video, we're gonna explore the troubled history of this once famous jelly and show you the modern archival replacements that artists use today to get that same luminous effect and perfect consistency. Megilp was essentially a combination of two ingredients mixed in various proportions, which made it the ideal medium of its time. The first ingredient was linseed oil boiled with lead compound. It's called litharge. It's a type of lead oxide, and this process of boiling the oil with the lead oxide was there to make it dry extremely fast. And the second ingredient was a mastic varnish, a natural resin dissolved in turpentine. Megilp, which is one of the funniest words, has had a lot of different names in the long history of Western art. It has multiple spellings, and the recipe itself has evolved a lot from one artist to the next. However, this jelly, under one formula or another, is reported to have been used by famous artists such as Rubens, Joshua Reynolds, Turner, Constable, or even Sargent. Megilp was widely adopted because it offered unique, very desirable working properties that were really hard to achieve otherwise. And the number one thing was the thixotropy. It's a translucent, jelly-like medium that holds its shape perfectly. It becomes kind of fluid when you stir it, when you mix it, but when you leave it alone, it goes back to its gel-like consistency, which means that it can really retain the pressure of the brushwork. It doesn't run out or level out. The second quality is that it's super fast drying. The lead content acted as a powerful seccative, a dryer, allowing the layers of paint to dry quickly, enabling artists to work faster and applying the glazes sooner, so everything was going much smoother with just a little bit of a fast drying time. And finally, Megilp has some great visual qualities. It creates a beautiful, rich, slightly glossy sheen, giving the paint layers a desirable gem-like luminosity and depth. But the very chemistry that made Megilp appealing also made it a disaster for the long-term stability of the paintings. The first type of problem is darkening and yellowing. The mastic resin component of the Megilp, combined with the linseed oil, is naturally prone to both yellowing and wrinkling, and the gel-like texture made it more difficult for artists to realize when excessive amounts of oils were used, leading to paint films with insufficient pigment content, leading to more oxidation problems down the line. And of course, due to the perfect texture of the Megilp, the paint can appear properly thick when in fact it is lacking pigments, which is not good. All good paint film should be composed of as much pigment as physically possible. Any excess medium takes the place of the pigments and is destructive for the integrity of the paint film. In the original recipe of the Megilp, the mastic-based resin became extremely difficult to remove without damaging the paint film underneath due to the cross-linking between the layers. Simply speaking, if you varnish a painting with mastic resin, it's fine. You can remove it if it yellows down the line because it sits on top of the painting. But if you incorporate it in the painting medium, it then becomes inherently part of the paint film, and good luck removing it when it yellows. The second type of problem is the premature cracking and wrinkling. This medium had such perfect texture on its own that it felt as if you could paint with almost no pigment. And as we've said before, it gave painters the impression that the paint had enough body when in fact it could be lacking pigments. Megilp's consistency allowed for excessive use, and you wouldn't realize that there was a problem before the paint film was fully dry. In some cases where excessive amounts have been used, the thixotropic gel collapsed as it dried, leading to the paint surface becoming deeply wrinkled and shriveled. As the lead-treated oil continued to polymerize and shrink, the brittle mastic resin in the film could not accommodate this movement, and this resulted in a distinctive, severe form of cracking, which is sometimes referred to as alligatoring or drying cracks on the surface of the paintings. Big flakes appearing on the surface, sometimes pretty early on. And the result was a generation of paintings that rapidly degraded. Keep in mind that there is no way to attest that the Megilp medium was the sole culprit, as the issues seem to have been caused by a combination of factors. And as it turns out, with proper precautions, Megilp can be used successfully to create an archival painting, and certainly this has been done by many great artists. Now, issues seem to appear when Megilp is used in excess with linseed oil, used in excess with the improper layer process, or with other kind of experimental additives or pigments. The most notorious case of experimental painting is certainly Sir Joshua Reynolds. As apprentice and biographer James Northcote reported, his paintings would crack sometimes before he has got them out of his hands. Reynolds was aware of the structural issues, but often dismissed them, believing that the aesthetic effect was worth the technical risk. And he would experiment a lot with pigments like bitumen, waxes and resins of all kinds to achieve various effects. From one painting of Reynolds to the next, it's very hard to find technical continuity, so you never know what kind of crazy experiment he has done on each painting. And this makes Reynolds' paintings very tricky for conservators to clean or restore without risking further damage. And this is something that already appeared quite clearly to the early conservators and even the clients of Reynolds, requiring him to attempt himself restoration and repainting of some of his earlier works late in his career. Reynolds wasn't the only one though, and a lot of other artists got pretty experimental during the 19th century, and some paintings are irreparable. Again, it is not all due to Megilp, but Megilp was kind of the leading medium of this whole experimental era. This crisis led to a widespread distrust of complex mediums and contributed to a later return to simpler oil to solvent mixtures, or even in the case of the Impressionists later on, simple pale slow-drying oils like poppy seed oil. We have to say a word also about the industrialization of the paint manufacturing process, giving artists much more reliable and stable paints with just the right amount of oil that wouldn't require such complex mediums. When the tube of paint was invented, it allowed artists to use the purest form of paint without needing to grind the pigments themselves or come up with complex mediums to make the paint workable. It was the perfect solution, easy and reliable paint with just the optimal amount of oil in it. This era was also synonymous with huge progress in chemistry, allowing for the development of more stable, modern alternatives to Megilp, so this is what we'll cover now. If you want a modern alternative to Megilp, you're at least gonna have to get used to the idea of abandoning the linseed oil boiled in lead oxide. We don't make painting products out of lead oxide anymore, and I don't think it's ever coming back because it's toxic. Lead poisoning is a serious thing for the painter, not so much for the painting as it seems. It turns out that the lead was not really a culprit in the conservation problems outside of speeding up the emergence of the crackings. But the key to replicating Megilp's effects without its stability issues lies in replacing the volatile yellowing mastic resin and the toxic lead dryers with some more stable synthetic alternatives. The first attempt at creating a modern derivative of Megilp came from Jacques Marogé, 20th century director of the Louvre laboratory, and Marogé created a specific thick paste emulsion called Marogé pastes, intended to replicate the supposed secret lost medium of the Flemish masters. The Marogé medium possesses the same beautiful handling properties as the Megilp, the same thixotropy and flow as the Megilp, but also inherits the same yellowing and also increased brittleness, and it also contains lead, so it's a no-go for us. In a sense, the Maroja medium is a standardized 20th century recipe of the same kind of problematic Megilp type of medium, so it's not the best alternative for us modern artists. The most direct and popular modern answer is Gamblin's Neo Megilp. Now it's not called Neo Megilp anymore. Now it's called Galkid Light Gel. And I don't even know if they've changed the formula. Anyway, Neo Megilp was formulated to deliver the exact same thixotropic feel and the optical depth of the traditional Megilp while being safer to use and vastly more durable over time. The massic resin is replaced by a synthetic alkyd resin that has the same thixotropic qualities but dries to a more stable, non-yellowing paint film that has significantly more resistance to cracking. And in replacement of the fast-drying lead oxide, the alkyd is formulated to speed up the drying time by about 50%. So outside of this Neo Megilp, we can say that the entire alkyd family is really the best modern substitute for what used to be the Megilp medium. Liquin, made by Winsor & Newton, is the most recognizable brand, but it exists in other brands, for example, Galkyd, Flow and Dry. They are all alkyd mediums and they differ mostly in their texture. In short, the alkyd family of mediums allows us to have all sorts of texture. We can have the very fluid, we can have the very gel-like, we have the original texture of the Liquin, what's called the original, which I think is probably one of the closest to the original Megilp, even though maybe a little bit more gel-like, a little bit less fluid. Really, I think it depends. First thing, it's hard to know how exactly was the texture and the consistency of the original Megilp. It can be a lot of things, and at least with the alkyd family of mediums, you can have everything you want, from very liquid to extremely pasty and butter-like. So really, you can have it all. In all these alkyd mediums, you have this wonderful thixotropic texture and fast drying time. Alkyd resins are synthetic polymers that have superior properties compared to natural resins like mastic. However, be careful that, like with Megilp, excess should be avoided, so never use more than 20% to the volume of paint. And note that this is already huge, like 20% of, I don't know, Liquin or Galkyd to the volume of paint is huge. Why would you need so much of it? Do you want to paint with something that feels like jellyfish juice? You want to keep it to the minimal proportion. The least stuff you can add to your paint, the better you'll be. Another great thing about the alkyd mediums is that, as far as we know so far, they are non-yellowing. They stay clear, they preserve the true color of the paint, unlike the mastic resin combined with the oil, the linseed oil, that has a strong tendency to yellow. And probably one of their best qualities is they cure to something that's both hard, tough, and durable, but still remains flexible enough to resist the cracking that you have in some of these Megilp paintings. You can really have a controlled drying while preserving a very flexible paint film. So all this video for that, yes, this is it. The best substitute to the Megilp Miracle Medium is these gel alkyd line of products like Liquin or Galkyd. So this is the closest we have. This is the best of both worlds. It's safest to use, not necessarily in terms of fumes and stuff like that, but it's safest for your paintings at least. Make sure you always use that in a well-ventilated studio as anything, and avoid excess, and you should get something pretty nice. Should you try to get some true original Megilp? I don't think you should. I think you're better off sticking with something like an alkyd. It's a better modern alternative, and I think you have everything you need to make some beautiful paintings out of these. Remember that the medium doesn't make the painting, the painter makes the painting.